Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we will explore what the Deadites are. One of the most terrifying and iconic creatures in horror cinema are the Deadites. These demons, which possess human bodies, are born from the chaos and darkness of the Necronomicon, an ancient and forbidden book that unleashes its malevolent influence. Since their first appearance in Evil Dead 1981, the Deadites have terrified generations of viewers with their grotesque appearance, supernatural strength, and insatiable thirst for destruction. That is why in this video, I will explain in detail the history and origins of the Deadites. To do this, I will summarize their story across different movies, then discuss their physical appearance, their personality, and their incredible abilities and known weaknesses. The origin of the Deadites dates back to the original Evil Dead 1981, directed by Sam Raimi, where the horror begins with an ancient and malevolent book known as the Necronomicon, or the Book of the Dead. This book is the key to unleashing evil and darkness upon the world of the living. In the plot, a group of young people venture into an isolated cabin in the woods for a vacation, unaware that this will mark the beginning of their worst nightmare. The Necronomicon found in the cabin is an ancient grimoire that contains dark rituals and forbidden knowledge. Its power is so immense that, once unearthed, it awakens a demonic force capable of possessing humans, transforming them into monstrous Deadites. The first character to experience this terrible fate is Linda, Ash's girlfriend, who becomes possessed after the Necronomicon is read aloud, thus releasing the book's malevolent forces. Once possessed by the demon, a Deadite not only loses its soul, but also becomes a vessel for a demonic entity that takes full control. Deadites are not just grotesque and deformed monsters. They are intelligent and cruel demons who, by possessing a human body, gain supernatural abilities. Their appearance becomes horrifyingly distorted. Their skin turns pale, their eyes glow with an infernal light, and their faces contort into an expression of madness. The Deadites' voices, an eerie blend of their original human host and the demon within, are used as tools to terrorize their friends and family, mocking those who remain untainted and attempting to break their resolve. What makes the Deadites even more terrifying is their insatiable thirst for destruction and their ability to possess those around them. They do not simply seek to kill, they aim to psychologically torment their victims as well. Throughout the film, the characters struggle to survive as their loved ones are slowly turned into these monstrous entities, making the Deadites a threat that is not just physical, but also deeply emotional. Ash's battle is not only against these demonic creatures, but also against the loss of his humanity, as the people he loves the most are gradually possessed and transformed into Deadites. The atmosphere of the cabin, combined with the innovative special effects of the time, creates a setting where violence and psychological terror blend masterfully. The Deadites do not merely attack brutally. They also force their victims to endure an endless nightmare. The screams, the maniacal laughter, the distorted voices, and the grotesque transformation sequences all contribute to the suffocating and nightmarish horror that defines Evil Dead. Beyond their physical abilities, the Deadites possess a demonic nature that makes them unpredictable. They do not follow a clear pattern of behavior, as their actions are driven by a desire to spread chaos and destruction, but also by an almost infinite capacity for manipulation. It is in this first confrontation with the Deadites that one of their most defining traits is established: their ability to distort reality and perception, making them appear nearly invincible. In this initial encounter, Evil Dead presents the Deadites as a terrifying menace, one of the most malevolent and dangerous creatures in horror cinema. The Necronomicon serves as the catalyst that unleashes the horror, and the Deadites are the physical manifestations of this ancient evil. This introduction to the Evil Dead universe not only establishes the Deadites as a literal threat, but also delves into the psychological aspects of horror, where the true terror is not just in the monsters lurking in the darkness, but also in the paranoia and fear of losing one's humanity. The impact of Evil Dead 1981 was so profound that, despite its low budget, It became a classic of horror cinema, solidifying the Deadites as some of the most iconic and terrifying monsters in film history. The movie laid the foundation for a saga that would further explore the capabilities of these demons in later installments. But it is in this first film that the fundamental concept of the Deadites is introduced. Possessed beings, terrifying, unpredictable, and completely devoid of humanity, whose sole purpose is total destruction. With the release of Evil Dead 2 in 1987, the saga took an unexpected turn, blending horror with a more comedic and surreal style. Despite this shift in tone, the Deadites remained a lethal and relentless threat, evolving both in design and personality. In this sequel, Sam Raimi took the foundation of the first film and expanded it, pushing the concept of the Deadites to a more extreme level by exaggerating their behavior and giving them an even more disturbing and mocking presence. From the very beginning, Evil Dead 2 establishes a key difference from its predecessor. Horror is still present, but now it is accompanied by a more frenetic style, where exaggeration and absurdity play a crucial role. Ash Williams, the protagonist, becomes the center of this madness when, after the events of the first film, he is once again drawn into conflict with the Deadites in the same cursed cabin. One of the most notable differences in this installment is the personality of the Deadites. While in the first film they were terrifying and ruthless demons, in Evil Dead 2 they become more playful and mocking, displaying a macabre sense of humor. They laugh at their victims, torment them psychologically with illusions and tricks, and even take pleasure in the pain they inflict. In this movie, the Deadites don't just seek to kill, they aim to drive their opponents insane, breaking the barrier between horror and absurd comedy. The design of the Deadites also evolved significantly in this film. While in the first movie their appearance was grotesque, but relatively restrained, in Evil Dead 2 their faces become more expressive, with exaggeratedly large eyes, distorted mouths, and deformed bodies. Thanks to a larger budget and improved practical effects, the Deadites are capable of even more extreme transformations. A prime example of this is the possession of Henrietta, Professor Noby's mother, who turns into a rotting monster with a more exaggerated and grotesque appearance than any Deadite seen before. Another key aspect of this evolution is how the Deadites affect Ash. In this film, Ash undergoes one of the most iconic possessions of the saga. His own hand becomes infected by the evil of the Necronomicon, taking on a life of its own and forcing him to amputate it. This moment, aside from being one of the most memorable scenes in horror comedy cinema, represents how the Deadites have evolved into an even more invasive threat, capable of attacking in unexpected and creative ways. Additionally, Evil Dead 2 introduces a fundamental element to the Deadites' mythology: the distortion of reality. The cabin is no longer just a cursed location. It becomes a space where the laws of physics and logic are constantly broken. Inanimate objects come to life, shadows move on their own, and characters experience terrifying hallucinations. All of this reinforces the idea that the Deadites don't just possess bodies, they can also manipulate the environment and toy with their victims' minds. Despite the film's more comedic tone, the Deadites do not lose their ability to terrify. They remain unpredictable, relentless, and brutal, and their evolution in this sequel proves that their threat extends far beyond simple possession. They are now creatures that revel in chaos, suffering, and the madness they inflict on their victims. Their sadism, combined with the film's extreme visual style, makes them even more disturbing entities. With the release of Army of Darkness in 1992, the Deadites reached a new level of madness and violence, transforming into an epic threat on a scale never before seen in the saga. Instead of taking place in an isolated cabin, this film shifts the action to a medieval world plagued by infernal creatures, where Ash Williams must face an entire army of Deadites. In this chapter, we will explore how the Deadites evolve once again, expanding their mythology and redefining their role in the story. After the events of Evil Dead 2, Ash is transported to 13th century medieval Europe through a dimensional vortex, becoming trapped in a time when humanity is still battling dark forces. Here, the Deadites cease to be simple demonic entities that possess individual bodies and instead become an organized army, led by an evil version of Ash himself. Evil Ash, a corrupted and deformed version of the protagonist who rises as the leader of the Deadites. One of the most significant changes in this film is the way the Deadites act as an undead army, featuring skeletal soldiers, resurrected knights, and demons of various forms. Instead of stalking their victims in the darkness, as they did in the previous films, the Deadites now march into battle in hordes, launching large-scale attacks against humans. This change gives them a more epic feel, bringing them closer to the style of monstrous armies seen in dark fantasy films. Even though Army of Darkness adopts an even more comedic tone than Evil Dead 2, the Deadites do not lose their terrifying essence. They are presented as an imminent threat to humanity, capable of raising the dead from their graves, possessing the living, and wielding dark magic. The way they interact with Ash also reflects this tonal shift. While some retain the mocking sadism characteristic of Evil Dead 2, others exhibit exaggerated and almost cartoonish behavior, playing with physical comedy and the irony of the story. The design of the Deadites in this film also undergoes a significant transformation. While there are still demonic possessions similar to those in previous installments, Army of Darkness introduces a wide variety of forms for these beings, from talking skeletons to deformed undead knights. The practical effects and animatronics used to bring them to life showcase an incredible level of creativity, making the Deadites more dynamic and expressive. Some have grotesque, rotting faces, while others maintain a more skeletal appearance, reminiscent of the puppetry in Jason and the Argonauts, 1963, a clear inspiration for the film. One of the most iconic moments in this film is the final battle at the castle, where Ash, alongside a group of medieval villagers, faces off against the Deadite army led by Evil Ash. In this sequence, the Deadites demonstrate their ferocity and resilience, attacking with catapults, fighting with swords and spears, and even displaying a certain level of military strategy. This is the first time in the saga that the Deadites appear as an organized war force, expanding their role beyond mere possessing entities. Another fundamental aspect of Army of Darkness is how the Deadites are portrayed as an unstoppable force that transcends time and space. Through the Necronomicon, these beings have the power to manipulate reality and timelines, suggesting that their influence extends far beyond what had been seen in previous installments. This concept is reinforced when Ash attempts to use the Necronomicon to return to his own time, but makes a mistake in pronouncing the magic words, allowing evil to continue pursuing him even in the future. After more than 2 decades since Army of Darkness, the Evil Dead saga returned with a reinvention that left fans in shock. Directed by Fede Alvarez and produced by Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, Evil Dead 2013 is not simply a remake of the original film, but a modern reinvention that elevates brutality and horror to extreme levels. In this new version, the Deadites return with a more terrifying appearance, renewed ferocity, and a much darker and more serious tone than their predecessors. In this chapter, we will explore how the film reintroduces these demons and turns them into one of the most ruthless forces in horror cinema. Unlike the 1981 version, where the characters travel to the cabin for a simple retreat, the remake introduces a new reason. The protagonist, Mia, a young woman struggling with addiction, isolates herself in a cabin with her friends in an attempt to overcome her drug dependency. This narrative change adds a layer of desperation and vulnerability that the Deadites mercilessly exploit. The Necronomicon once again serves as the catalyst for horror. In this version, the book is even more sinister, with blood-stained pages, grotesque illustrations, and explicit warnings that it must not be read aloud. However, the characters' curiosity leads them to ignore these warnings, thus unleashing the evil lurking in the woods. From that moment on, the Deadites begin to possess the protagonists, setting off a spiral of extreme violence. One of the most significant differences in the depiction of the Deadites in this version is their appearance and behavior. Instead of a more cartoonish and mocking approach, like in Evil Dead 2 or Army of Darkness, the 2013 Deadites are purely malevolent and ruthless entities. Their completely white eyes, discolored skin, and macabre smiles make them look like true demons straight out of hell. Additionally, their way of speaking is more disturbing, featuring guttural voices and phrases designed to psychologically torment their victims. Another major difference is the level of graphic violence they exhibit. While the original films had an exaggerated tone, with excessive blood but an almost comedic style, the remake takes gore to an extreme level. The Deadites mutilate, dismember, and torture their victims in shocking ways. Scenes such as the split tongue with a box cutter or the blood rain during the film's climax are proof of this. Mia's possession is particularly brutal, with a physical and psychological transformation that turns her into a truly terrifying entity. The nature of the Deadites also feels more unstoppable than ever. Not only do they possess humans, but they seem to have complete control over the cabin and its surroundings. The victims are not only fighting the possessed, but also the forest itself, which responds to the Necronomicon's influence with living roots and ominously shifting shadows. In this version, the Deadites appear to have a stronger connection to the Necronomicon and a clearer purpose: to complete a dark ritual that will give birth to an even more powerful demonic entity known as the Taker of Souls. This makes them more than just evil spirits. They are now servants of a greater force, with a concrete plan to consume souls and unleash hell on Earth. One of the most interesting aspects of this film is Mia's transformation into the story's heroine. At first, she is the Deadites' first victim, but after surviving a rebirth experience, she becomes the last hope to defeat them. In the final battle, facing a fully manifested demon, Mia proves that no matter how powerful the Deadites are, they are not invincible. After a decade since the shocking remake of Evil Dead 2013, the saga returned with Evil Dead Rise 2023, a film that not only brought the Deadites back, but also expanded the franchise's universe, taking them to a completely new setting. Under the direction of Lee Cronin, and with production by Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, this installment proved that the essence of visceral horror and the brutality of the Deadites is more alive than ever. In this chapter, we will explore how Evil Dead Rise reinterprets these demonic entities and introduces them into a more terrifying and claustrophobic context. Unlike the previous films, which took place in isolated cabins in the woods, Evil Dead Rise moves the action to an apartment building in Los Angeles. This decision completely changes the dynamics of horror, turning an ordinary home into a death trap where the Deadites can lurk around every corner. The story follows Beth, who visits her sister Ellie and her children in their apartment, only to become trapped in a nightmarish hell when an ancient demonic book is discovered in the building's basement. This book, similar to the Necronomicon we already know, appears to be a different variant within the Evil Dead universe. In this installment, it is presented as the Book of the Dead, with an even more terrifying design and pages filled with macabre illustrations. As in previous films, reading it aloud unleashes evil, allowing the Deadites to possess humans and turn the apartment into a living hell. One of the most notable characteristics of the Deadites in this version is the brutality with which they attack their victims. From the very moment Ellie is possessed, the film spares no expense in extreme violence. Her transformation is shocking, with a contorted body, sickly skin, and glowing eyes that turn her into a terrifying entity. Her possession is more psychological and manipulative, as she not only physically attacks her family, but also plays with their emotions, mocking their fears and weaknesses. One of the most terrifying aspects of Evil Dead Rise is the way the Deadites use the human body as a mere vessel for evil. Ellie, even after being possessed, continues to behave like a mother, only in a twisted and sadistic way. Instead of simply killing, She enjoys torturing her victims and instilling terror in her family. Her interactions with her own children are chilling, as she pretends to have moments of lucidity only to lure them into her deadly trap. Another new element in this installment is the presence of a new type of Deadite, the flesh abomination, or the marauder. In the film's climax, the Deadites manage to merge multiple bodies into a single grotesque amalgamation of limbs and deformed faces, creating an even more terrifying monster. This creature represents the evolution of the Deadite concept, showing that they not only possess individual bodies, but can also fuse into a single entity of pure evil. Throughout the film, the apartment building becomes an inescapable labyrinth. The victims not only face the Deadites, but must also deal with an environment that seems to conspire against them. Doors slam shut on their own, lights flicker, and dark hallways add to the sense of desperation and claustrophobia. As in previous installments, the concept of no one is safe is a constant, as the Deadites can possess anyone at any moment. Body horror is more intense than ever in this installment. Scenes such as Ellie chewing on glass or using a cheese grater as a weapon reflect the raw violence of Evil Dead Rise. There is no room for comedy or the humorous relief that characterized Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. Here, everything is designed to shock and make the audience squirm in their seats. The film's climax is a desperate fight for survival. Beth, who initially seemed incapable of taking on the role of heroine, is forced to face the Deadites in a brutal battle. Using a chainsaw, an iconic weapon in the franchise, she manages to defeat the Marauder and put an end to the nightmare, at least for now. However, the film makes it clear that the evil has not been eradicated, only waiting for its next opportunity to return. And now that we have thoroughly covered their story, I want to talk to you about the Deadites' physical appearance, what we know about their personality and behavior, and explain their incredible abilities and known weaknesses. One of the most terrifying aspects of the Deadites is their grotesque appearance. From their first appearance in Evil Dead 1981 to their most recent version in Evil Dead Rise 2023, these creatures have undergone various changes in design, but they have always maintained a disturbing and deeply inhuman aesthetic. In this chapter, we will explore their most iconic physical traits, how they vary depending on the film and context in which they appear, and how their terrifying design has contributed to making them unforgettable within the horror genre. In the original 1981 film, the Deadites were created with practical effects and handcrafted makeup, giving them a raw and unsettling look. Their faces transform into terror masks with pale or grayish skin, marked veins, and white eyes lacking pupils, making them appear completely devoid of humanity. Their mouths deform into macabre smiles with sharp, blackened teeth, giving them an almost cartoonish but extremely disturbing appearance. The texture of their skin is another aspect that makes them terrifying. In some cases, it seems to be in the process of decomposition, covered with wounds, deep cuts, and signs of decay. Other Deadites have skin that is more stretched and shiny, as if consumed by an evil force that has altered their form. Furthermore, in many scenes, their bodies contort into unnatural shapes, highlighting their demonic nature. With a larger budget and the creative direction of Sam Raimi, Evil Dead 2 took the design of the Deadites to a new level. Here, their deformities are even more pronounced, with puffier faces, wrinkled skin, and deep cracks that make them look like animated corpses. The use of stop-motion animation and more advanced makeup effects allowed these demons to have more dynamic facial expressions, which made them even more terrifying. The eyes of the Deadites in this film are particularly striking. In some versions, they are completely white, as in the first film, but in others they shine with yellow or green light, reinforcing their connection to evil. Additionally, some of them have uneven eyes or abnormal positions, which accentuates their grotesque nature. In Evil Dead 2, we also see Ash's brief transformation into a Deadite, showing how the demonic infection distorts the human face, sinking the cheekbones, marking the skin, and giving the victim an eerie, involuntary smile. The third installment of the saga, Army of Darkness, presents the Deadites in their most varied and exaggerated form. Due to the more comedic and adventurous tone of the film, their appearances range from terrifying to ridiculously grotesque. Some of the Deadites have completely skeletal bodies, with elongated skulls and mocking expressions, while others resemble bloated zombies with rotten flesh hanging from their faces. This film also introduces the concept of Deadites that can regenerate and change shape. For example, Ash himself faces an evil version of himself, which starts as an identical replica and then transforms into a monstrous version with large eyes and a macabre expression. We also see Deadites with horns, elongated limbs, and deformed bodies, which further expands the variety of these creatures. The Evil Dead Remake took the Deadites' appearance to a completely new level, opting for a more visceral and realistic approach. Here, the Deadites are creatures that seem to be in constant suffering, with torn faces, burned skin, and completely black or red eyes. Their mouths are filled with blood and sharp teeth, and in many cases, they seem to have lost almost all their humanity, becoming beasts with expressions of pure hatred and sadism. One of the most noticeable changes in this version is how their bodies react to possession. Instead of simply transforming into monsters, the victims undergo a process of mutation and self-destruction. Their skin cracks, veins bulge, and their limbs contort into impossible angles. In some cases, the Deadites rip off their own faces or mutilate their bodies without showing any signs of pain, which makes them even more terrifying. This terrifying design is complemented by an intensive use of practical effects and realistic makeup, avoiding CGI in most scenes to give a more tangible and organic feel. In Evil Dead Rise, the Deadites evolve once again, adopting an even more disturbing and dehumanizing aesthetic. The skin of the possessed turns yellowish and covered in dark veins, their eyes glow with a spectral light, and their mouths appear unable to close fully, as if they were trapped in an evil laugh. One of the most terrifying aspects in this installment is the use of extreme body horror. In several scenes, the Deadites present grotesque deformities, such as twisted limbs, dislocated jaws, and expressions of absolute madness. The Flesh Abomination is also introduced, a creature formed by the fusion of several possessed bodies, representing a new form of horror within the Evil Dead universe. Furthermore, the film plays with the idea that the Deadites can mimic humans to manipulate their victims. In some scenes, we see them attempting to speak with their loved ones using affected voices and expressions of apparent sadness, only to then twist into macabre laughter and attack with inhuman ferocity. Although the Deadites may seem like simple demonic beings driven by violence and chaos, their behavior suggests a twisted personality that makes them even more terrifying. Unlike other monsters or evil entities in horror films, the Deadites don't just seek to kill. They enjoy tormenting their victims in cruel and sadistic ways. Their existence is tied to the Necronomicon Ex-Mortis, the ancient cursed book that grants them power and binds them to a primal evil that seems beyond human comprehension. In this chapter, we will explore their behavior, their motivations, and the nature of their connection to this forbidden book. Unlike traditional demons that seek a purpose or have clear rules, the Deadites appear to be driven by a single goal: possession and total destruction. It is not enough for them to simply kill their victims. Instead, they first corrupt, manipulate, and subject them to unbearable psychological and physical suffering. In Evil Dead 1981, we see how the Deadites play with their victims, shifting between an apparently harmless state and their demonic form to sow doubt and despair. Cheryl, the first to be possessed, goes from screaming in horror to singing with a mocking, childlike voice, confusing her friends and weakening their will before attacking them with relentless brutality. This pattern repeats throughout the franchise. The Deadites rarely attack immediately. Instead, they prefer to wear down their victims psychologically, making them believe their loved ones can still be saved or provoking disturbing visions that push them to the brink of madness. One of the most disturbing features of the Deadites is their clear enjoyment of others' suffering. They are not silent creatures that attack without emotion. On the contrary, they constantly mock, laugh, and toy with their prey before finishing them off. In Evil Dead 2, 1987, we see the Deadites express themselves with cruel and twisted humor. When Ash faces his own possessed hand, it not only attacks him, but laughs hysterically as it strikes and humiliates him. At another point, the entire cabin seems to come alive, with the furniture and even a lamp laughing at his suffering, as if evil itself were enjoying his loss of sanity. In Army of Darkness, 1992, this sadism is mixed with more exaggerated humor. The Deadites enjoy terrorizing and ridiculing Ash at every opportunity, mocking him even as they are being destroyed. Their behavior is almost childish in some cases, as if they were playful entities that take pleasure in pain and chaos. In Evil Dead 2013, the sadism of the Deadites reaches an even more disturbing level. Here, they not only brutally attack their victims, but they make them suffer in extreme ways. One of the most shocking moments is when the possessed Olivia slashes her face with a shard of mirror while smiling, as if she enjoys her own pain and the horror she causes others. The psychological manipulation is also more intense in this version, with the Deadites imitating the voices and expressions of their victims to make those trying to survive doubt themselves. The Necronomicon Ex-Mortis is the source of power for the Deadites and their connection to the world of the living. This book, made of human flesh and written in blood, contains the incantations necessary to summon them and unleash their terror. However, what makes the Necronomicon even more sinister is that it seems to have a will of its own. In all the films, the book acts as a catalyst for horror, drawing in the curious to read it aloud and release the Deadites. Despite warnings, the Necronomicon always finds a way to be read, suggesting that its influence goes beyond the rational. The Deadites are completely subservient to the will of the book. They have no clear leader, but they respond to its call and seek to expand their influence by possessing more people. In Army of Darkness, we see how they can be organized into armies when the magic of the Necronomicon is powerful enough, indicating that their chaos can be directed if properly channeled. While their main goal is possession and destruction, the Deadites also seem to have a strong drive for revenge. When someone manages to survive an attack, the Deadites become obsessed with them, returning to torment them over and over again. Ash Williams is the best example of this. From his first encounter with the Deadites in Evil Dead 1981, he becomes their primary enemy. Throughout the franchise, we see how they relentlessly pursue him, mocking him and making him suffer at every opportunity. In Evil Dead 2, even his own hand turns against him, forcing him to cut it off in a desperate attempt to stop the possession. In Ash vs. Evil Dead, the TV series that continues the story, we see that the Deadites have never forgotten him and are constantly seeking revenge. This thirst for revenge is also shown in Evil Dead Rise, 2023, where the Deadites pursue the main family of the story with an intensity that suggests they enjoy making them suffer before fully possessing them. Despite not being creatures with individual consciousness in the traditional sense, the Deadites have a terrifying and well-defined personality. They are not simply mindless monsters, but sadistic entities that revel in the despair of their victims. Their mocking laughter, cruel humor, and constant psychological manipulation make them unique enemies in the horror genre. Their connection to the Necronomicon Ex-Mortis makes them even more dangerous, as they cannot be easily destroyed and always find a way to return. Whether as a chaotic horde in Army of Darkness, grotesque beings in Evil Dead 2013, or relentless demonic forces in Evil Dead Rise 2023, the Deadites have proven to be one of the most terrifying and memorable entities in horror cinema. Deadites are not mere demons that inhabit the underworld, but evil entities capable of unleashing unimaginable horror in the world of the living. Throughout the Evil Dead saga, They have demonstrated terrifying abilities that make them nearly unstoppable enemies. From possession to manipulating the environment, these beings have a repertoire of powers that make them extremely dangerous. However, despite their apparent invulnerability, they also have weaknesses that the protagonists have managed to exploit at various points. In this chapter, we will analyze both their incredible abilities and the few ways they can be defeated. Possession is the Deadites' most characteristic ability. Unlike other demons in horror films, who require specific rituals to invade a body, the Deadites can possess their victims almost instantly once summoned by the Necronomicon Ex-Mortis. This process can occur in several ways. In Evil Dead 2013, we see that simply coming into contact with the blood of a possessed person is enough to become infected. This turns the Deadites into a kind of demonic plague, where each victim can quickly become a new threat. Anyone who reads the Necronomicon aloud opens a portal for the Deadites to enter the world of the living. In all the films in the saga, this is the primary trigger of the horror. In Evil Dead 2, we see that the demons can possess objects or even parts of a person's body, like Ash's hand, suggesting that they don't always need to possess a whole human to exert their power. The most terrifying aspect of this ability is that possession is nearly irreversible. Once someone is possessed, they rarely return to normal, and when they do, it is usually an illusion designed to manipulate others. The Deadites do not only possess the bodies of their victims, they transform them into living weapons. Controlled by demonic forces, these bodies no longer feel pain and gain immense strength, allowing them to break bones, lift their victims with a single hand, or even smash doors and walls with ease. Notable examples include: in Evil Dead 1981, we see Cheryl, possessed, effortlessly get up after receiving multiple blows and severe injuries. In Evil Dead 2, Henrietta, the possessed old woman, shows impressive strength despite her frail human appearance. In Evil Dead Rise 2023, the possessed mother Ellie survives multiple brutal attacks and continues fighting without showing signs of pain. In addition to their strength, Deadites are virtually immortal. They cannot be eliminated by conventional means like gunshots or stabbings, making them a terrifying threat. Unlike other monsters that only attack physically, the Deadites enjoy tormenting their victims mentally before killing them. They use the following tactics. They briefly transform into the original person to confuse and manipulate the survivors. They laugh at their victims, provoke them, and play with their fear before attacking. They can speak fluently, sing, shout, and change the tone of their voice to deceive their prey. An iconic example occurs in Evil Dead 2, when Henrietta, possessed, imitates the sweet voice of her former human self to deceive her husband and make him lower his guard. The Deadites can alter the reality around them, making inanimate objects come to life or distorting their victim's perception. In Evil Dead 2, the cabin itself seems possessed, with furniture laughing and moving in a terrifying way. Moreover, they can shapeshift and grotesquely adapt their bodies. In Army of Darkness, the evil version of Ash regenerates after being destroyed. In Evil Dead Rise, the possessed mother fuses with other bodies, creating a monstrous entity with multiple limbs. Despite their great power, the Deadites are not invincible. There are methods to stop them, or at least contain their influence. One of the most recurring methods to face the Deadites is dismemberment. In Evil Dead 1981, Ash discovers that the only way to prevent his possessed friends from continuing to attack is by chopping them into pieces. However, this does not always completely destroy them, as parts of their bodies may continue moving independently, as happens with Ash's hand in Evil Dead 2. In some installments, it is mentioned that certain spells from the Necronomicon can seal or even destroy the Deadites. In Army of Darkness, Ash uses a phrase from the Necronomicon, Klaatu Barada Nikto, to attempt to contain their power. In Evil Dead 2013, the protagonist uses a purification ritual with fire to try to stop the curse. Although it is not always a definitive solution, in some films it is suggested that fire can weaken the Deadites or destroy the possessed body. In Evil Dead 2013, the only way to fully stop Mia's possession is by burying her alive and then burning the possessed corpse. On the other hand, the Necronomicon is the main source of their power, and while destroying it is not always possible, some attempts have proven to temporarily weaken the Deadites. And this is all we know so far about the entities known as Deadites. The first time I encountered these beings was with the 2013 remake. I had heard of them, but I never imagined they would have such an original and complex lore and backstory. But let me know your opinion in the comments. Did you already know the Deadites? Do you think a creature as monstrous and terrifying could really exist? And finally, if you were to encounter one, do you think you could face it, or would you just run away? Share your answers to these questions and your general opinion on the Deadites from the Evil Dead universe. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you liked it, share it to support the channel, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of my new videos.